Let's make sure this ID matches the ticket this time. The crack in Carson Bremer's voice, polished, precise, and yet tinged with forced patience, carried easily across the space between gates B16 and B18, slicing through the quiet churn of Monday morning travelers. At least 3 heads lifted from scrolling phones. Behind the counter, the label of his Navy cravat flashed his surname, but the squared shoulders and clipped vowels were louder. The scanner in his hand beeped, an impatient staccato, as if scolding someone for daring to disrupt a process built on rows, order, certainty. Watching him, Mavis closed her silver reading glasses, folded them down neatly, and placed them with care atop the tan folder on her lap. She withdrew a linen handkerchief from her jacket pocket, dabbed at her forehead, though the terminal wasn't particularly warm. The claim didn't fit the truth, not really. She'd shown her ID twice at check-in, once more at security. She kept her voice even. "You've seen it already. I fly with you often." Across the jet bridge glass, the curve of the aircraft nose cone gleamed in the Arizona sun, Flight 9427 to Anchorage boarding first class first. The tensions in her jaw told her she'd have to breathe through this. Carson pressed further, not missing a beat. Sometimes these things can be missed. Policies update quick these days. Then, with a little smile for the elderly couple queued behind her, still hungry to demonstrate composure, "We're here to keep everyone safe, you know." Carson took her ID again, turning it under the fluorescent light, fingers just a shade tighter than necessary. Beneath the counter, Mavis's worn briefcase, a badge of 1,000 meetings and midnight memos for the nonprofit she'd built, rested against her left shoe. She left her hand on it, thumb brushing the seam, breath measured. "If you have any concern, please check with your supervisor. I have somewhere important to be." Carson's gaze flickered. "We'll need another moment, Ms." He trailed off, as if weighing which syllable would best land the message. Mavis didn't flinch. Overhead, the boarding monitor blinked. "What time did you say?" she asked, eyes drifting from his face to the faded red of the clock behind him, a detail more for herself than the onlookers. The ping of a new message on her phone echoed, a brief, shrill reminder that clocks don't slow for indignity. Her hands paused, fingers curling. People leaned closer. Stillness crowded the air. The threshold to chaos was just a step away. A younger Mavis would have handled this with fire. Now the years pressed differently on her joints, as did the new, insistent ache in her side. A legacy from her doctor's visit 2 Fridays ago, when time had become a proposition both finite and fraught. In the moment she remembered the call, the soft, tired voice of her physician, carefully wrapped in facts, the way one pads glass for shipping. She detold no one, not even her assistant. Not today. Behind her, the hush was interrupted by Carson's voice again. "We've just received a random screening request from TSA. Happens every so often with these flagged files. Right this way, please." He gestured, palm facing the carpeted path towards a side hallway near the gate. Mavis rose, not gracefully but certainly lifting her bag. She smiled briefly at the couple waiting behind. "Excuse me," she said, her voice even if her inside was not. In her chest, the clock nudged louder. The random screening involved 2 uniformed agents, a portable metal detector, and the ritual palpation of wrists and soles. Carson stood a step behind, arms crossed, as if rehearsing for a parade ground inspection. The woman in the TSA vest gave another glance at Mavis's credentials and frowned. Professionalism radiated from her, but it was careful, tentative. "We're all set," she said, lips pinched. Carson's eyes didn't lift. "Are we sure any liquids prohibited devices?" His words were slow and staggered, each clause punctuating the message for anyone in earshot. Authority, vigilance, protocol. He picked up a clipboard marked not for airline records but dense with hand-scribbled codes. A young man in a black t-shirt waited nearby, clutching the charger to his phone, the pastor she surmised later. He bit his lip, staring before sliding his phone into recording position almost apologetically, the lens fixed on Carson. Mavis held her breath, felt the tremor in her left hand, forced it still by squeezing her fingers together behind her back. "I'd like to proceed to boarding. My seat has already been assigned." Carson affected a smile. "Of course, let's just verify a few details." For each full scan of her driver's license, the reader beeped. A bystander piped up, nervous and emboldened. "Don't they do that to everyone?" The question hovered, diffused by the glare Carson shot over. "Some passengers trigger the systems more often, sir. Please wait your turn." Mavis stood in the center of the gaze, measured by eyes and screens alike. The agent nodded, quietly resentful to be part of the performance, but checked her shoulder bag one last time. Her bottle of pills rattled inside. In another time, she'd have extended a hand to a crying child, shared a snack with the anxious mother by the window. She'd threaded comfort through small acts, made herself a still point in travel's chaos. The memory stung. The present was louder. "Any sharp objects?" the TSA agent asked. Only words, Mavis replied softly, then regretted it. The loaded moment wasn't worth the price. Carson's jaw flexed. We get a lot of guests claiming first class who haven't properly upgraded. It's just a precaution, you know. The camera in the pastor's hand twitched, a tiny flicker of nerves. Behind the veil of protocol, another bystander shuffled her feet. Just let her board, she's not causing any trouble. But Carson surged. We appreciate assistance, ma'am, but we have our procedures. The tension thickened. Mavis stared at the floor pattern. The line behind her had doubled in length, and whispers ran through it like wind through dry grass. The last beep sounded, the handoff clumsy, but it was done. Carson's thumb hovered over the intercom button by the flight desk, a final authority. If you'd step aside for just a moment longer, he said, the edge now unmistakable. We'll confirm all the details this time. She looked at him, then at the expectant faces behind the glass. I'll be right here. Her hands settled on her bag, a promise or a shield, she wasn't sure. The idea of sitting, securing her dignity, and thereby increasing the length of this confrontation pressed at the edges of Mavis's patience. She watched the time on her phone tick forward, another email from her nonprofit pinging over the notification bar. Call Ray, services urgent. Her thumb hovered over reply, but she considered for a moment, simply moving aside, letting the tide choose another target. Her grip on the briefcase faltered. The questions looming were too heavy, not just here but elsewhere. She saw the schedule reminder blinking on her second phone. A funeral service scheduled for this afternoon stacked atop the flight manifest in cruel symmetry. She weighed the cost of minutes lost. She could step back, take the next flight, let Carson finish his ritual. It was possible, even practical. Her bag swung low, almost brushing the carpet as she shifted her balance toward the service entrance. In the lens's periphery, the pastor's eyes met hers. A quiet question there, a silent plea for these moments to matter beyond a viral headline. A small boy nearby, staring sidelong, clutched his mother's hands. Mavis steadied, breath catching at the back of her throat. She pressed her briefcase flat against her side, shifted her weight again, and straightened, deciding without flourish not to surrender this ground. Her silence, bold for its lack of spectacle, refilled the breach Carson had made. She unsnapped the top latch of her briefcase, slid her glasses back into place, and met the lead flight attendant's gaze with a restraint built over decades. Carson misread the stillness, letting a smirk tug one corner of his mouth. Thank you for your cooperation, he said, tone almost victorious, and flagged the uniformed supervisor with a crisp gesture. Gate 16, we've had irregularities with passenger assignment. Might be best to hold boarding till we're certain. The intercom snapped off just as the boarding clock reset. The line behind her froze. She stayed. Nothing in her posture indulged him now. The die was cast. Flight 9427's clock ticked down in military time on the monitor. Last call for Group 1, Phoenix to Anchorage. All remaining passengers report to gate, the intercom announced, a mechanized voice overlaying the tension. Carson snapped. We have 2 minutes before closeout, everyone hold. He gestured again toward the mobile screening area, propping the clipboard against the gate's swinging door. Somewhere in the sequence, Mavis's second phone spilled a calendar reminder onto its lock screen. 12:48 p.m. arrive. The text below named a location, now mostly obscured by a finger dragging it aside. The flight's needs and her own deadline interlocked, neither yielding. The pastor's lens panned in, live stream status nudging its way to a few dozen viewers, mostly notifications from a local church account, but rising. Comments bled across the bottom of the screen. Not again. This is wrong. Why her? In the cluster of escalation, a captain strode up, heightened by the distinctive hat, the authoritative role of a pilot's gait. His name bar glinted, Captain R. Hicks. He didn't rush, he observed first, weighing with a pilot's precision what details suggested turbulence beneath calm. Report, he asked, voice steady to Carson. Passenger flagged for ID issues, then assigned random screening via security process, possible fraudulent upgrade or non-matching credentials. Carson spun it quick, words clipped like orders. The captain's brow furrowed, a pilot's skepticism sharpening as he looked from Carson to Mavis. Ma'am, may I see your documents? He asked, tone measured. She passed her boarding pass, license, and membership card, every slip in order. The pastor's lens caught the exchange. Ma'am, Captain Hicks said, I apologize for your wait. Are you traveling under corporate policy or personal arrangement? Mavis replied, voice even and low, both. That answer made the captain pause. He traced the edges of the nonprofit's business address on the card. Could you clarify the nature of your work? Is there a reason this booking surfaces as group travel, not individual? A calm blankness held her reply. I'm responsible for the booking. She slid a single page over, printed with the airline's frequent flyer policy. Is there a revised process since last quarter for nonprofit status upgrades, Captain? The room froze for a moment. The captain hesitated, then took the document, reviewing the fine print. He held Carson's gaze for the briefest second, eyes a degree sharper, lips thinned. Carson's fingers began to fidget at the intercom, pressing keys that did nothing. You said every procedure was followed? The captain asked, clipped. Carson blinked, mouth slightly open. That's what we understood. The line moved, questions remained. The captain didn't fill the silence. He turned, walked 2 paces away with Mavis's boarding materials, and called the airline's operations desk. I need confirmation for passenger 1A Advance Organization's booking, code 773,345. Also check priority upgrade records for Phoenix to Anchorage, today's manifest. Static filled the line. He rolled his shoulder tension away, jaw clenched tight against the low drone of boarding noise. With one hand, he scrolled through digital manifests, lips pressed tight. Name's Mavis Jennings, he intoned. Double-check the group and ticket, make it fast. 2 seconds, then 3, the crew behind him slowed to silent curiosity, watching their authority puzzle its own puzzle. He listened, nodded, scribbled a short note, back-turned for discretion. He inhaled longer than before, watching Mavis out of the corner of his eye. Are you sure this is the booking? He asked softly. Mavis, arms folded, replied, absolutely. She didn't blink. Each word counted now. Beside the gate desk, Carson's fist bounced once, twice, off wood. Sweating now at his temple, he pressed his velvet lapel. The captain hung up. All records match perfectly on our end, but there's a discrepancy between the TSA screening list and the airline manifest. TSA only flags if the database codes don't align. He eyed Carson, tone flattening, sentences shrinking. You requested the screening? Carson twisted, mouth dry. Just trying to follow protocol. Silence gummed the air, sticking where words failed. The pastor's viewer count neared 200, comments sliding dizzy. Is that legal? Who does he think she is? A middle-aged woman at the rear lowered her phone, shamed. Someone else shuffled bags, shielding their face. The authority had not declared sides. The mood thickened, visibility impossible beyond the next small act. The trainer wire of the terminal vibrated with the tap and rattle of rolling luggage and murmured remorse. The captain, as if following an internal checklist, opened his mouth, then closed it. The 2 TSA agents re-entered, hands empty. Nothing to report, the first said, no eye contact. Mavis drew out a small, green-capped bottle, unscrewed the lid, and tipped a pill into her palm. She swallowed dry, returning the bottle to her bag. She uncrossed her ankles. A single drop of sweat rolled down Carson's cheek. He adjusted his necktie, once sharply, as if it were a lever. The captain's next call was muted. Yes, I need Ms. Jennings cleared directly. The pause hung, pregnant with judgment. Thank you. His jaw softened. Next to the gate, the pastor's lens marinated in the waiting, capturing the slow, silent drama. The pastor's comments began to fill with names of journalists, outlets, hashtags, channel handles. Local news pinged the feed. Every eye flicked up. Were they in the middle of something more? The captain hung up, exceedingly careful with his next sentence. Ms. Jennings, your roll with? He trailed off, then brightened faintly as a second phone in his pocket buzzed. He looked at it, eyes rounding, then at Carson. Do you know who our passenger is? Carson opened his mouth, then shut it. I manage the manifest, he said, voice flat, not the headlines. The pause snapped taut, only to be broken by a familiar ring in the air. Across the crowded gate, an airline manager stepped forward, clipboard in hand and breathless. A man at home in neither crisis nor comfort. He stopped just short of the barrier line, holding a slim business card. There's a press embargo on this guest, the manager said, glancing from Carson to the captain with visible urgency. The investigative reporter accompanying first class is not to be obstructed. Direct company order. The captain stepped back, mouth pinched. Carson's expression ebbed, uncertainty etched in lines from temple to chin, palms starting to tremble. Mavis sat silent, smoothing her coat. The manager passed the card over with a bow. Ms. Jennings, on behalf of the company, I apologize for the error. An electric hush settled. Wheels of cabin bags rolled by. A child's cough punctuated the quiet. For 3 breaths, the only sound was a high chime over the intercom. Then, striding down the jet bridge, another figure appeared, suit tailored, phone pressed to ear. She stopped short at Mavis's elbow. Vivian Keats, the airline's lead counsel, her face ashen as she absorbed the details from someone unseen on her call. In a voice pitched low but clear, she pronounced, "The ribbon cutting in Anchorage is postponed. All contracts with Bremer's crew are suspended until further notice per legal review. I'll handle media." To Carson, she addressed only 6 words. "We'll discuss this outside, immediately." He stepped back, right knee twitching as if buckling for the first time in years. His hand clung to the lip of the counter, knuckles pale, eyes affixed to a fixed point near the floor. One by one, bystanders who'd hovered near his defense blinked, looked down, scrolled their screens as though searching for rescue. The woman who'd piped up before now stuffed her phone into her purse. The man who'd commented on just procedures fumbled his headphones, face turned to the jet bridge. The once loud suddenly shrank into silence. Mavis's voice, barely above a whisper, cut through. "Policies are only as fair as their keepers." She lingered for a beat, then reached for her briefcase. The boarding area exhaled, threads of tension fraying. She stood, collected the glasses, folder, lock-lip technology, all moved with deliberate calm. The aisle parted, some passengers set eyes on their shoes, others trained their phone cameras in awkward, hungry angles, still others shot glances like apologies never spoken. She passed Carson, whose lips pressed in defeat. Their eyes met, a gulf opening between what was right and what had been done. She stopped mid-aisle and offered quietly, "Next time, look harder." No accusation, only the weight of fact. She pressed on without waiting for reply. The pastor, now deep in the live stream, voice breaking a little out of frame, ended with, "History's not comfortable, but it's necessary." Comments blitzed. "Viral, watch this. She's a hero. Where's the apology?" The gate stilled as cabin crew and agents realized the performance had burned a path past plausible deniability. Carson sank into a vacant chair, tie unfastened, cheeks drained of their earlier certainty. His assistant hovered by the counter, arms folded, blinking away remorse. The crowd deflated. Drama resolved, lines redrawn. Mavis reached the jet bridge, suitcase trundling, jacket now over her arm. A gentle pivot from confrontation back to ordinary movement. Out on the concourse, beneath a mural of northern lights, the airline's Western Regional VP waited, clutching a folder embossed with gold. "Ms. Jennings, on behalf of the board," she didn't allow him to finish. "Let's ensure this never happens again." Her words were flint. Outside, day burst white and dry. A silver sedan, discreet except for its government tag, idled at the curb. The driver opened the back, helped with bags, asking gently, "We're still on schedule, correct?" Mavis nodded. Phone pressed to her ear, she said, "Yes, I'll be there. Everything's on track." "We can adjust arrival by 8 minutes, the driver said quietly. Mavis replied, "That'll do. Let's head out." The car swept from curbside. Time, lately her adversary, ran alongside for 2 more blocks before sinking step with her intention. Within 48 hours, the airline's legal team convened in the glass-walled boardroom at headquarters. The CEO, jaw clenched, fired off questions, who'd flagged the screening, why hadn't past complaints triggered audits, and what to do when the media storm turned systemic. Beside him, the general counsel scrolled through a growing spreadsheet. "The contract for the Anchorage terminal launch is suspended, effective immediately. Lead Fa Bremer's employment is under urgent review." Across the table, the CCO said, "Our bookings in the nonprofit sector just dropped 12% overnight. We'll need new training, visible change. Field staff recertification for bias protocols begins Monday." The CEO closed the laptop. "Find Jennings. Offer a settlement. Policy goes public." The window outside showed protesters already gathering, chants pushing up through the glass, numbers rising by the hour. 3 decisive moves set the path. Launch the internal audit, pull Bremer off flight duty, and announce the suspension of exclusive contracts, dollars draining as obligations flipped. On the morning news, an anchor spoke with careful empathy. Viral footage from Phoenix's Sky Harbor depicts an esteemed civil rights leader subjected to multiple unnecessary screenings at the gate. The airline's statement: suspension of staff, contract review, and public apologies, but community advocates demand deeper reforms. By day's end, the video trended at 2.3 million views. The company's stock slid 7.2%, erasing $78 million in value, and calls for economic boycott trended city to city. 4 days later, under mounting pressure, the airline announced a new policy: 3,000 frontline employees required to complete bias response training, oversight from an independent civil rights board, class action eligibility for all passengers flagged in the past year. Even the governor weighed in, his office pledging review of all state contracts with the carrier. At the funeral home's white entry that afternoon, Mavis arrived just as the church bell sounded noon. In the hushed vestibule, an aide approached. "Ms. Jennings, it's all over the news." She paused, then shook her head gently. "Not now, we have work." Mavis's focus stayed with the moment's purpose, not the digital aftershocks. As mourners filled the room, someone's phone lit up with the headline. She never glanced at the screen. 2 months later, the airline's market cap still hadn't recovered. Hashtags in support of procedural equity in air travel had reached 5.6 million unique signatures. The board statement closed with a figure, $12.5 million in settlements earmarked for eligible claimants. In the world of policy and posture, the earth had shifted, a little. For every 10 apologies, one tangible act followed. This time there were 3. And in communities that had long kept quiet, travel forums buzzed with advisories. Know your rights, know the routes, know the names. 6 months drifted quietly by. On a flight from Chicago to Denver, a young attendant approached row 4D, smiling, measured, no clipboard in sight. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Jennings. Would you like water or tea?" It was the same airline. Mavis replied, "Thank you, just water, please." The attendant returned with 2 bottles. No announcement, no additional checks. That was all. Some changes are written in law, some take root in faces, in pause and gesture. In every system, assumptions multiply when left alone, like shadows behind drawn curtains. If no one notices, no one is moved to act. But in this world, bystanders are architects, too, of exclusion or of repair. Sometimes one person's stand is quieter than history expects, but more lasting than we dare to hope. Simple dignity, when claimed, doesn't need an audience. Share this story for every traveler still waiting to take the aisle in peace. Subscribe for more journeys that cross invisible lines, and pass this on to someone who can turn discomfort into dialogue. We're all witnesses, so what will you do with the seat you're given? In silence, the world shifts. But even as the world shifted in subtle increments, the measure of how far it had yet to go was never out of sight. Change washed in slowly, as tides do, wearing away what once felt immovable. Yet underneath, currents still tugged in familiar directions, pulling at those least shielded by comfort or chance. 3 months later, a small press event unfolded at the Anchorage terminal that had once been the endpoint of all that upheaval. The ribbon, now a gleaming blue arc flanked by local volunteers, fluttered as dignitaries lined the walkway. Mavis stood among them, taller than the memory of her fatigue, watching the sunlight catch on streaming banners. Welcome, access, dignity. She hadn't wanted her name burned in news ticks or policy white papers, but somewhere between the confrontation and resolution, she had become instead a fixture for those who needed precedent more than platitudes. A slim man in a bomber jacket, Conrad Lee, a junior staffer from the governor's office, threaded through the crowd with a sheaf of statements folded in his hand. "Ms. Jennings, press pool by the podium. They're asking for comment." Mavis nodded, stepping out of the shade, smoothing her dress as she walked toward the impromptu cluster of cameras. She caught sight of Captain Hicks out of uniform, his hair wind-stirred, standing at the far edge of the gathering with arms crossed. His nod was the same quiet endorsement, all burden and intent. As the microphones jostled, someone called over, "What's different today, Ms. Jennings?" She didn't rush with her answer. The pause that filled the gap was measured, letting her own heart settle. "Today I didn't need a special status to be believed," she replied, voice clear, almost gentle. "And neither does anyone else who walks through these doors. That's the change worth making. Policy matters, but presence, everyday, ordinary presence, matters just as much. If we see one another clearly, the systems fall in line eventually." The press shuffled, some hunched over their phones, tweeting out the quote in real time. One, a college reporter with a mop of curly hair and a plastic badge, asked, "Is it enough?" Mavis smiled, the corners of her mouth edged with memory and the cost of the lessons behind her. "It's not enough until nobody needs to be brave just to travel," she said. "But it's a better start than silence was." As the cameras whirred and finally clicked off, Vivian Keats, her once adversary, now an unlikely ally, joined her at the edge of the platform. "The external review board is in its second round," Vivian reported quietly. "You know, half the new hires say they applied because of your story." Mavis let that settle. "Let's hope they don't need another like it," she replied, warmth and gravity commuting in the words. Vivian's glance was grateful, shaded by something keen, respect with regret's shadow. The crowd thinned. A tremor of applause caught her by accident. Mavis excused herself and wandered through the terminal, new murals up, accessibility placards clean, staff greeting arrivals not with suspicion but with decent, practiced curiosity. She sat beside the window watching flights come and go as emails filled her phone, most ignored. The ache in her side was manageable today, and in each quiet moment she pressed her palm over it, reminder and release. An older woman, cane in hand and hope in her voice, paused by Mavis, recognizing her from some late-night segment on procedural justice. "You're the one from the airport. What you said changed things," she whispered. "Thank you." For the first time, the gratitude rang gentle, not desperate. Mavis nodded, letting the woman's hand touch hers briefly. "We just have to keep going, that's all." Hours and miles later, alone in the waiting area for her return flight, Mavis allowed herself to examine the text thread with her board of directors, updates on local outreach, responses from families helped by the new partnership with the airline. A burst of laughter down the concourse caught her ear. The pastor from Phoenix, now on his way to Juneau for another conference, stopped beside her with a grin. "Would you pray with us at the welcome meal tonight?" he asked, almost shy. "I'm better with questions than prayers these days," she replied. "But yes, I'll come." He nodded, the burdens of witness carried lighter when shared. Night lowered itself across the sky, and when her flight was called, Mavis moved with easy certainty toward the gate. The agent, a freckled woman wearing a pin of both the airline's logo and a pink triangle of solidarity, broke into an easy smile as she approached. "Ms. Jennings, welcome. No second checks, I promise," she said, and handed back the scanned ticket. Mavis grinned. "I'm counting on you." Boarding was so smooth she barely noticed. The overheads clapped shut, the pilot's voice rolled over the comm, and the engines thrummed confidence into the airframe. She closed her eyes, feeling a contentment that was not triumph but resolution, a peacefulness won the hard way. Mid-flight, the attendant bent down, offering her a cup of mint tea. "On the house," the woman said, "and thank you." Mavis touched the cup, nodding, all the language that was needed floating unspoken. When they landed in Seattle, she gathered her things, tucking away a copy of the day's Anchorage Dispatch with her photograph beside an editorial on passenger dignity. She smiled wryly, slipping it into her folder. It wasn't legacy she'd aimed for, but service. She stepped briskly through the terminal, headed not to a limo or a podium, but to an after-school center where her nonprofit was launching a mentorship program with traveling scholars and local teens. A storm clouded over the rain-streaked windows of the youth center. Inside, teenagers sprawled at battered tables, some tracing flight maps for upcoming college visits, tickets donated quietly by the airline in recent weeks. Her executive assistant greeted her with a deep nod. "You made the late news again," whispered Tara, pulling up a chair beside her. "More parents asking about travel scholarships, want me to field the press." Mavis, gently brushing a curl from Tara's forehead, shook her head. "Let them come. The story's bigger than me. Let's make sure they see the students, too." A passing student, tall, gangly, hair in blue twists, looked up from her laptop. "Ms. Jennings, is it true they're naming a gate after you at Sky Harbor now?" Mavis laughed, surprised. "Not a gate, maybe just a lesson. And you, what gate are you aiming for?" The girl grinned, confident. "Harvard, maybe Tokyo, too. Worlds wide, you know." "I do know," Mavis replied, hope stretching between them like runway lights into tomorrow. Time, after all, could work for you if you pressed boldly enough. Meanwhile, in a corner office walled with glass and nervous ambition, Carson Bremer sat across from a new corporate compliance officer, hands folded, voice hushed. He'd been moved from customer interaction to an analytics role, retrained on the new policies. "I know what I did," he said, gaze fixed on the laminated employee bill of rights posted above the monitor. "I wasn't thinking, not really, not enough." The officer, a bearded woman with kind eyes, didn't interrupt. "What would you do now in her place?" He closed his eyes. "I'd stay, ask questions, not freeze people for the look of their paperwork or the curve of their history. I'd listen longer." There was sorrow there, but also change, a hard-won update written not in protocol, but in the gut. She nodded, recording the interview for HR records. "Growth matters, owning harm matters more. We'll follow up on your training." He accepted this, relief and regret mixing, neither fully excused. As the sunset sharpened against neighboring office towers, Carson watched the world outside. Planes gliding in, abuzz with mobility, each passenger trusting gates would open the same for all. For a moment, he wanted to believe it was true. A year to the day after the incident, the airline held a newly mandated annual forum, open to the public, streamed live, inviting stories of passenger experience direct to the executive panel. The room vibrated with energy. Community leaders, activists, students, off-duty staff in crisp Navy vests, airline officers, and union reps. Mavis received a quiet invitation, RSVP'd only as in attendance. She sat near the back in shadow to let other voices claim the spotlight. There were stories, a mother recounting her child's journey without harassment for the first time, a wheelchair user describing ease, not extra tests. A student from Mavis's own nonprofit, grinning nervously, took the mic. "My first flight was last month, Anchorage to Tucson," he said, voice cracking but resilient. "They didn't ask for extra proof. I sat by the window like Ms. Jennings said I could. Out there it looked so big, I felt like I belonged in the air." Applause followed, rolling like a tide. The CEO leaned forward to close the event with an unexpected pledge. "Beginning next quarter, our passenger equity review will publish all complaint data and bias response audits. Your stories aren't abstractions, they're our future protocols." Reporters typed furiously, hashtags blinked alive on the conference feed. The crowd, for once, felt less like an audience than a living quorum, a movement wide as the air itself. At the reception afterward, the pastor from Phoenix, now chaplain for the North Division, caught Mavis's shoulder. "What seat will you take next?" he teased lightly. She thought for a moment, fingers tightening gently on her briefcase. Maybe just a window or an aisle next to a young person who still thinks it's all magic. They laughed, the edge of memory and hope both marking the moment. It's whispered that in the time following, Carson attended gatherings of his own, quiet workshops, volunteer programs, moments behind the scenes where bias could be unraveled, thread by stubborn thread. He never touched the intercom button again. Those who saw him said he'd become a stickler not for rules, but for reasons, always asking why, always reviewing the list of names, never letting the past out of his sight. Most travelers never met Mavis, or read more than a headline about the storm she weathered and the clarity she'd coaxed into the system. They found instead, along concourses and at crowded gates, new signs in plain language. Your identity, your dignity, our shared obligation. More staff waved travelers through not because of special status, but as if dignity were baseline, expected. A grandmother from South Texas, traveling for her first great-grandson's birth. A Syrian student, quiet with wonder at the gleaming jetways. A retiree heading for the cruise of her dreams, all moved with the ease of ancestors never given that grace. From time to time, a staffer, someone who once watched and said nothing, knelt to tie a child's shoe or stopped at the edge of a crowd to remind a colleague to look again, deeper. The world, for a spell, bent closer to what it should be. Last names and paperwork still caused friction, progress never so smooth as a press release. But somewhere beyond the endless counter of tickets and times, the smallest rituals of repair had begun. And on a clear day, as a jet banked north under the glimmering veil of aurora, Mavis watched the world below and let herself finally, for one blessed breath, rest. For on the far side of confrontation, beyond policy and spectacle, there was only this: each person granted their ordinary passage, a seat rightfully theirs, and the hush of a world learning quietly to do better.